Good evening and welcome to our Concerned Citizens for Good Government meeting. We have some exciting speakers tonight with reference to the I-49 corridor and in reference to the environmental concerns. I know that we've had speakers before, but there's been ongoing developments, and should have an entertaining meeting this evening.
Keep in mind that we'd like to have you ask the question, so please come to the front so we can record this, because we do do it with YouTube and also the public stations. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. On a much lighter note, I'll be talking about I-49, but just briefly talk about some of the things Marshall mentioned. Wall Street Journal about 3 or 4 months ago had an article about priority pollutants. These are the chemicals we test our water for. That's required testing. It's a monthly test. You can get it from LUS, and it goes through the 100 different. The problem with that is there are 100,000 toxic chemicals that could get in our water. And usually the chemicals that give us problems are not the 100 priority pollutants. And a prime example was one of the biggest groundwater pollution cases in the country was Phoenix, Arizona, where Motorola used TCE, trichloroethylene. It's a solvent. When you put together a panel, maybe on a little plate of aluminum, just your handprints will adversely affect the glue contact. So you spray it with TCE, it evaporates and cleans it immediately so the glue adheres. Used quite a bit in assembly of electronic plates and different devices. Motorola in Phoenix got rid of the stuff in ponds. TCE goes through barriers like a bullet. And the only way, this is not a chemical tested in the 100 prior pollutants. The medical community discovered childhood cancer rates were off the charts in Phoenix. And through a long period, years, to try to put the finger on the cause, they brought it down to TCE. Now, trichloroethylene was used for 80 years here in Lafayette. Every train that went through the roundhouse got washed down with TCE. And then it was steam cleaned after that. So there's no question TCE is over the ground, all over the place in that rail yard, one of the major chemicals. And you can bet it's in our water and it's never been tested for. And I don't know that for sure. I'd like to be optimistic and say it's not there, but it's one of those chemicals we should be looking for. So, getting down 49, I'm going to go a little history 101 about this project. It's been around for a long time. And just to start from the beginning, how did I-49 get built? Well, it started with the Dixie Freeway around New Orleans, which was being built in the early 70s, under construction. About 2 years after the National Environmental Policy Act came down. Lo and behold, they're making a circle around New Orleans through the marsh on the south side. Have $450 million to do it. They $60 million into it. They bought all the right-of-ways. They're building some of the connections, and some of those connections are still there on I-10 in New Orleans East. You got a big interchange that goes nowhere. When it just goes to, that was where the Dixie Freeway connected on the east side. And lo and behold, says the Sierra Club, you guys didn't do an environmental impact study on that project. So with one sharp lawyer, Mike Osborne, and the Sierra Club, a handful of people saying, you got to do this, and we're going to ask the court, should you do it, and should it be allowed, providing all the damage this thing does to wetlands. So it went through the whole court process, appeals and everything in federal court. The court ruled that indeed an environmental impact study should have been done, and it wasn't. And had it been done, the project should have been denied. And so the judge says, you spent $50 million of the $400 million you have in hand. I would strongly recommend you consider a north-south interstate highway between I-20 and I-10 with that money. And that's how Interstate 49 was built, with the $400 million that wasn't spent to build the Dixie Freeway in New Orleans. Because a handful of citizens said the environment's important and our laws are there to protect the environment, and we're going to bring that issue to court. So, when I-49 got built about the early 90s, the Chamber gang said, we got to continue this thing to New Orleans. And the first step is to build it through Lafayette. So the project then involved a recommendation that we build a tunnel from Willow Street to Pinhook, almost 5 miles. And it would drain. Willow Street is around 42-foot elevation. Go to Pinhook, it's about 30. So you got enough rock that would drain right to the bayou. But of course it's underground. And the bottom of it is at 14 feet. So the chamber has a big public meeting and they're discussing how wonderful it's going to be. You're going to go underground and, you're going to breeze through Lafayette with hardly a chance to get out and see the town. You'll just be looking at lights in a tunnel. And so, I got up and raised my hand. I said, just stop and figure it out, almost 5 miles of tunnel. If you have 100 dump trucks, 20 yards each, and they make 4 trips a day, and they work 250 days a year, it's going to take about 16 years just to get the dirt out. And I said, y'all got another real big problem. You drain it to 14 feet. The high water mark in the bay is 24. So it's going to be half flooded when you need it most to get hurricane evacuees out. Because when the most likely big rains come, August, same time, August, September, the same time the hurricanes come. So that project died away. That was the end of that. Next thing you know, they're whacking St. Genevieve. And they're building a whole new overhead project. It's 20 feet from the door of St. Genevieve. That's okay. It's going to be okay. 20 feet's okay. And the pastor at St. Genevieve rallied the troops. They had a public hearing. They had 350 comments. 349 was against the project. So that ended it again. That brings us to about 97, 98. So 2001, they crank up this project again. And now they come up with a whole EIS. They progress a lot further. They're going on much better. And they do an environmental impact study. Well, a citizens group got together and said, we don't think that's right. The problem legally with your project is that it is 6 alternatives, all exactly in the same path. And the alternatives about, what size this bridge will be, how high it's going to be, what color the walls are going to be in the tunnels and all that. Because these projects involve 6 to 7 underground tunnels to get under the railroad. And so the citizen group filed suit, landed in federal court in Lafayette. Judge Tucker Melanson ruled in favor of the highway department. The argument was, these are the only 6 alternatives, underline only, that meets the requirement of safety and traffic movement. So our suit failed. We lost the suit. But that was 2003, 2004. That killed the project for about 13 years, 12 and a half, almost 13 years. Now we crank it up again. Are we going to use the same environmental impact study we used before that they successfully defended in court? Of course, we're going to ignore the argument. We move this project forward with $59,700,000 contract to various engineering firms and public relations firms. They got $8 million public relations money in this project. That's convinced you guys that this is a great project. You got people roaming around these meetings, they get paid $300 an hour. And so these are lobbyists. They are experts at convincing you how great this will be for the community. But they hit a stone wall again. They got a bunch of legal problems with this project, starting with the railroad and the fact that it went through 9 years of litigation and it has been declared a hazardous waste site. That's a real problem for contractors, because you can't put anybody working on a hazardous waste site. They might drill into the dynamite that's left behind, all the asbestos, all the oil and all kinds of other stuff. There's 250 tanks out there. There's over 100 known chemicals in those tanks of various types and stuff that needed paint, and you hold solvents for the painting the trains. Every train that went through was cleansed of its old paint, sandblasted the old paint off, of course, all lead-based paint, and then it was primed with lead-based primer, and then painted with lead-based. And some of it landed on the train, but a lot of it didn't. And so it's all out there on the surface. So you got some real problems declared by the federal court in Shreveport, Judge Hicks. And then that was appealed to the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans, and the Fifth Circuit unanimously upheld Judge Hicks' ruling that it is indeed a highly contaminated site. And there was consolidated companies that was being forced to clean up some of the railroad mess, and they were contending legally it wasn't their mess, it was the railroad's mess. So, and they prevailed in court. So the Judge Hicks and the Fifth Circuit didn't have the opportunity to say, go clean this up, because this is a suit between two private parties. Of course, the railroad just bought consolidated companies out. They bought them out, I guess paid them well enough that they don't have to sell food anymore. And so the railroad owns the consolidated site right now. So you got, that's a legal problem. A suit has been filed by various plaintiffs, including the Salvation Army, that contends that they are threatened, their building and their residents and their clients, so to speak, are being threatened by this hazardous material that's at one point a well drill, one of the deepest well drilled to deal with the contaminants is 40 feet from their building. And so justifiably they filed this suit, which was supported by the International Salvation Army in London. And their comment was, not only should you do it, but you have a duty to the community to prevail and pursue this legal issue. So where does that put the highway? How are you going to fix this thing? First of all, you got maybe 7, 8 years of litigation. It'll come down to the railroad mediating the site or cleaning up the site. Now, clean up the site, probably looking at 20 to 30 years. If you look at what's happening at other sites around the country to get this done, you can't just come and move, a zillion tons of hazardous material, and it's saturated soil, and it's saturated with mostly the fuel they were using, number 6 bunker oil, which contained benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. All bad stuff. Xylene is it's a solvent you use to clean your paintbrush. But benzene is real bad, ethylbenzene is real bad, and so is toluene. So the real harmful chemicals. Not to mention the asbestos. Each train had about 1,000 pounds of asbestos. We were overhauling 10 to 20 a month. So do the math. Got 80 years of overhauling steam trains. You got 1,000 pounds of asbestos, and so you're putting tons and tons per month just into the ponds. The ponds north of the roundhouse. And this is something I know a little bit about because my dad worked there, my grandfather worked there, my uncles worked there, and we'd often go visit them as I was a child growing up around our house. So this is something we saw and watched. We watched whole tank cars that had been whacked and banged up by derailments. The cranes would just push them off into the ponds, the whole damn tank car. Watch this happen. You know, I mean, this is the railroad solution to problems. No telling what those chemicals were in these tank cars that were certainly not cleansed and clean before they dumped them into the ponds. So how'd the railroad fix it? They just covered all that crap up. Left all the pipes, left everything behind, 250 tanks, several caches of dynamite that nobody knows where it is. And so to get this fixed, to mediate it, what you would try to do, that's the cheapest, that's only about 100 million, you would solidify the contaminants so they stay in place. Now when you mediate a site, you can never put anything on the surface. It's forever condemned. Forever condemned. So there's no highway going there. Now if you clean the site and you dig up all this crap and haul it to Morgan City or whoever will take it, 20 years at least, maybe more. That's a long time before this highway built. And that's one legal problem. The other legal problem is the environmental impact study. An environmental impact study has a 3-year life. The one we deal with was finished in '03. So we 13 years into 10 years past its life. That could trigger a new environmental impact study. New information of significant environmental consequence. When they dealt with the railroad, they said it was a matter of concern, there could be contaminants there, but they really didn't delve into it. Now they have a federal judge that says you got a problem. And because it's illegal to take hazardous waste site, no contractor can put anybody on it. Because if they're injured, that's an uninsurable risk, and they're going to pay for the damage plus treble or quadruple punitive damages. So no contractor will put a soul on that. So it's really a quarantine site. And that's a real problem for the current $59 million contract. Because what that contract called for was to bring this RR1 plant, RR3 plant, I mean one of the 6, whichever one they chose, to bring it to contract specifications. And to get a project to contract specifications, there are a lot of things you have to do in terms of digging around in the dirt. Each piling is numbered. And at each piling site, and there's, in this project, there's something like 210, each piling site, you have to bore it to resistance. We don't have bedrock here. Resistance is wet sand. We usually call it an aquifer. So you bore down to wet sand like concrete, it can support a load. If it's thick enough. If you got wet sand that's 2 inches, it won't. But if it's 200 feet, like the Chico, or 300 or 400 feet, a massive wet sand system, it'll support anything you want to put on it. But that has to be investigated at each piling site. Then you have to deal with, that's boring. You have to deal with corings. Coring is they just punch a pipe down to the ground, and they pick it up, and then they split it in half, and they look at all the layers of sediment to look for soft spots. Spots that won't support the load of a highway. Corings. Then they have to do compaction tests. That's where you take a big round disc with a big heavy truck and push it on the ground and see what happens there. Then they have to do density analysis. So these are all engineering things that have to be done to make sure the highway stays straight and stays there and will be there for 100 years. Engineers are great at doing this. But in all this process, when they bore in these holes, nobody's looking for chemicals. There is absolutely no chemical analysis in this specification design. you hear about all the citizens group. The citizens groups were to tell the contractor what kind of lighting we're gonna have, what color to paint the walls of the tunnels. The project that they selected has something like 27,000 feet of wall below 10-foot grade. And the citizens committee's gotta go select what color paint we use on it, and what kind of benches we're gonna put under the thing. And what we're gonna do, there are 2 signature bridges. One would be at Second and Third, and the other at Johnson. Now, this is the biggest waste of money in the world, a signature bridge, a bridge over nothing. You know, I can't see, you know, we just have millions to throw away. So out of all of this, they get complete public objection to 5 underpasses. You got one at Simcoe, it's gonna start at St. Genevieve's and come out by Bustani's old store. It's 2,200 feet. You got 2 of them at Second and Third Street, kind of splits under the track. Got a new one at Jefferson, because Jefferson doesn't meet the railroad requirements. Railroad has to go 24 feet under. It's presently 14, so you gotta take another 2 blocks on each side, which will make it come out at Dwyer's. And then you got the Johnson Street underpass, that one goes 2,600 feet. So it'll come out somewhere on Main Street and no telling where on Hudson. So, and the community said, well, wait a minute. Whether you put a tunnel, it's a disaster. Look at the Jefferson Street underpass. Before it was built, that was the center of town. That was the prime real estate in town. This is where the center of town was. You put the underpass, that's the end of that. You go put in the underpass by Jacobs and Toby's Oak Grove, all those businesses go. So, you know, people figured, well, wait a minute, 5 new underpass in this town, gonna kill town. They're probably right. So, massive public objection there. So that brings us now back to the drawing board. Now we got 20 different alternatives. We got a new tunnel design, almost exactly like, it's not gonna be as long, it's only 1.25 miles. Only $890 million. And so on and on. You got a project that's gonna way too expensive to ever be done. The expense is caused by the marriage to the railroad. Unbelievably expensive marriage, to marry it to the railroad. Because you're dealing with much different specifications. And you can't decide, well, the interstate highway standard for an overpass is 16 feet. The railroad is 24. That's clear. When you put the structure, you have 30 feet. You only have a 3% grade. So you're going out on the east side 1,200 feet. Well, that's gonna, you know, that's unbelievable that we bring this project to downtown, and the reporter who gave the talk to the Democratic Awards said it well. That you're planning a project that'll destroy your community. You can destroy it. In Alexandria, 90% of our historical homes and buildings were destroyed. You can't replace that. And you're gonna do the same in Lafayette if that project goes through. So that's where we're at. They got a lot of legal problems. They're going through a supplemental EIS, which they don't have the money for that. What the contract requires in the supplemental is they review the existing data. Compile and review the existing data and do a drive-by windshield inspection. Now that's supposed to meet the requirements for an environmental impact study of a hazard site. That's really nonsense. And you know, they'll end up with another lawsuit. You can just, as sure as we're seeing here, they opening the door to another big lawsuit over this very issue, and their attorneys are waiting in the wings to make that happen. So we can say it's a long time before this highway is built. Now, I have to share with you that the environmental group is not opposed to I-49 continuing. It's just about where you're going to put it. And in line with that, I was on a Corps of Engineers low water inspection, and the then Secretary of DOTD, and this is 20 years ago, asked me about the I-49 through Lafayette. He said, when are your leaders in Lafayette going to find out and realize you cannot build that project through Lafayette? I said, why can't you? He says, it's not fundable. It's way too expensive. He says, interstate highways are fundable at 15 to 25 million a mile. So you can get $1 billion to continue I-49 from Interstate 10 to Boutique. That's the available funding in the interstate highway funding plans. You cannot get it if you're just upgrading an existing highway. That's very difficult to upgrade a US highway to an interstate. That's a bureaucratic no-no, real tough to do, because you already have a highway serving. You're not having increased lane capacity. You hope to get a little more speed with a big question mark. So then he said, you have to find, if you want to build it, you have to find a way around Lafayette or through Lafayette for around $400 million. If you can do that, you can build a highway. It's fundable. And I said, what's the best alternative? He said, the cheapest is to go to the east. There's nothing but cane fields and I said, there'll be a concern about wetland. No, he said you'd put it on Tesh Ridge. So I took that signal, and Pierce Melton and I went with a GPS unit and did a lot of walking and looking at elevations and laid out a plan, which St. Martin Parish got all excited about and turned over that basic plan to T. Baker Smith engineers in Houma, who got all excited about it because it was a way that you could evacuate people without going through the bottleneck of Lafayette. Lafayette has hurricane evacuees coming from Vermilion Parish, and they come in from Iberia to the southeast and the south. And they all block bottleneck where 167 and 90 come together. And so you got a massive traffic jam, and you got to deal with that. And going around on Tesh Ridge, high ground all the time. In this recent flood, when Highway 14 was closed, Highway 90 was closed at two different places, Highway 182 was washed out, I needed to go to Sycamore at the height of this flood, went to Bridge, to Parks, crossed over at Parks, drove on the Tesh Ridge, all the way to the road going to Sycamore, and went about 2 in the afternoon, came back at 7 at night, and at 60 miles an hour the whole way, never had water on the road, never had a problem. So you want to keep the highway running, put it on the place that nature gave us to put it, up on the Tesh Ridge. Reason they call it a ridge. And it was high and dry the whole time. So with that, we looked at it with T. Baker Smith's estimates of cost is $415 million, 17 million a mile. That's fundable, doable. The construction time through Lafayette is estimated at 8 to 12 years. This project is all at grade, and its predicted time by T. Baker Smith, 2 to 2.5 years to build. So it's fundable, can do it. With that, you would take the Evangeline Thruway, turn it into a nice boulevard, put in a few overpasses, upgrade and so forth, for the cost of one interchange. And I'll just mention the interchange at University Surrey. When you push the runway back, you had about 500 million estimated on that thing. So just the cost of that, you can go around it. We spent 169 million on the J-turns. So, with a few more pennies, we could have built the bypass from La Triomphe to Burbridge. So with that, I'll kind of close and say this project's never going to happen. There's too many detriments, too much cost, and now it's shattered into 19, 20 different plans. They can't decide on which. They're working on that, and they're getting paid very well. These engineers are smart, brilliant people. They're from all over the country. They haven't lived in Lafayette like we have. They haven't watched the changes. They want to give us a gift that we'll be stuck with. for future generations. But I say no, and we've turned this down for the last 25 years. We need to continue to turn it down. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Harold. Got a couple of questions. One is, and I don't know if it's the Department of Highways or what group, they've discussed doing supplemental environmental impact studies in reference and in conjunction with the I-49 corridor project. And I was wondering if you know, and if the Sierra Club has input into these supplemental environmental impact studies, and are those studies for the railroad, the Garfield power plant, and the railroad area, the areas that you're concerned about?
Okay, the EIS should include all those areas, but the environmental impact study supplemental or complete EIS is expensive, and there's no money in the current contract to do it. So it makes this whole supplemental legally vulnerable.
My follow-up question is, assuming that there is money to do a well-funded and appropriate supplemental environmental impact studies of those areas of concern, would that, if the study, depending on what the studies came back, and assuming that the studies tested for the concerns, if those studies came back and some remediation was practical, what would your position, or what would be your opinion with reference to the project moving forward?
Where it is a problem. The project can move forward with a new environmental impact study. The new alternative would have to be addressed, and that would certainly include putting it anywhere else but where it is. You can't build it where it is. You're not going to go through and fix this site. These rail yards are all over the country. You had to have a rail yard like this about every 300 miles. A steam train could run, had about a 600-mile range on its fuel, but had a 300-mile range on its water. It wasn't like the radiator in your car. It used the water, so it had to get water. If it ran out of water, the train had to be overhauled. So they never wanted to overhaul it, so it's critical. So these things are all over the country. We're not the only one. And Berkshire Hathaway, you know, BNSF Railroad, they spending around $900 million a year cleaning up these sites around the country. And they don't spend $900 million at one site. There's over 250 sites they're currently cleaning around the country. Why aren't they cleaning Lafayette? Just why aren't they cleaning Lafayette? It's right in the middle of our town. Of course, it's on the wrong side of the track. So that's one of the things that, if it's the wrong side, we don't worry about it. If this thing was somewhere around the Ambassador, it'd have been cleaned up a long, long time ago. But it's on the wrong side of the track. So, you know, we don't worry too much about things on that side. If you don't think we worry about it, go look at the rail yard when you're going towards Opelousas North, where the brick yard is. Look at that. There's no streets go across it. It's a jungle of crap and junk and old trucks and old piles of pilings and old rail. That's in the middle of our community. How can we let that happen? If somebody has grass growing too long on a lot, now they're ready to arrest you and send contractors to cut it and everything else. They can't send Southern Pacific a bill or Burlington Northern, whoever owns it, to clean up that junk. And is it hazardous material? Creosote material is absolutely hazardous. It's hazardous for the oil industry, but it's not hazardous for the railroad because they have a political exemption. Their creosote cross ties are non-hazardous. The creosote pile and the oil boys use are hazardous. There's a lot of injustice floating around on this issue.
Yes, sir. Would you please, you have a question?
Thank you. Roger Peak with the Sierra Club. Harold, can you tell me, did anybody ever find out if LUS tests our water supply for those particular chemicals associated with bunker oil number 6?
Some of those, like benzene, is one of the priority pollutants, and I can tell you about ethyl benzene. Xylene is not. But we know there are over 100 chemicals there. You know, when you had a problem with a tank car, they would just go over the pond and drain it. They didn't care what chemicals were in it. You know, the rails went through the pond. The big pond, you know, there's several of them around there. One of them is way, they filled it up with too much dirt, so it's way above grade. Then you had an open coulee, went from the rail yard right to the pipe. That's a 3-foot culvert right there. But I know about the coulee because when we were going to school, we had to cross the coulee. And that was in the days when a lot of crap was running down that, you didn't dare get in the water there. Not anything you looked at, you felt like you wanted to take a drink of it. So, you know, the surface contamination is horrendous. They should be monitoring the air emissions. They cleaned up a old filling station. This is a 2-pump station right right in your area, right by the downtown bridge. 2/10 of an acre. They spent $2.5 million on it. They removed the dirt to 40 feet. Then they put a barrier over that and refilled it with clean dirt. And they cannot put anything on that site. It's kind of a little park. And they have air sensing monitors continually being watched and observed to make sure that chemicals are not coming up and fuming up where people can breathe. So that's 2/10 of an acre. Now we got 40 acres plus. We really have about 100 acres when you include the Grant Street power plant. So according to one attorney in New Orleans that specializes in tank contamination, ground contamination from tanks, the biggest pollution site in the state of Louisiana is the Grant Street power plant. They had to keep enough fuel to run that plant for something like 30 days. And the big concern was railroad strikes. Because all the fuel they got was in tank cars on the railroad. This is a 105 megawatt plant. It's a real big output, using an awful lot of fuel. So that tank in the ground handled 30 days supply of fuel. And they kept it, they would drain the 6 or 8 tank cars on that spur that's still there. They would drain that into the swimming pool type concrete tank, which was not properly sealed. And so that's an albatross around our neck. That was really discovered when Pappy Landry was on the city council in the 80s, when Anderson Furniture went to the bank to get a new loan to rebuild the whole place. The bank said, oh, man, that property is worth nothing. You aren't going to mortgage that property. So Anderson complained to the city just bought them out. They didn't buy the property, they just bought the Andersons out. So they didn't need to sell furniture after that event. So this is a known site, and it's ours. We as citizens, it's ours. It's as bad as a railroad. Not quite as bad because it's mainly one contaminant. The railroad has a bunch of other stuff, dynamite, asbestos. The tolerance for asbestos is 0. Somebody drilled into asbestos and fumes started coming up. That's enough to cause mesothelioma and a whole list of diseases involved with being contaminated with asbestos. You know, it's under the ground. You know, it's a horrific issue, and it's not going to go away. And we deserve to have it cleaned up, just like many other rail yards that are being cleaned up all over the country.
Go ahead, yeah. Go ahead, sir.
Thanks. One more thing. I'm involved with a Facebook page called Sierra Club's Y49, and anything that comes out in the news, we try to post that on that Facebook page. And I have a conversation, there was a conversation going on the page with a gentleman who advocates for the cut and cover option. But something came up, and when I went back to look for it, a comment that he made, I couldn't find it. I wanted to show it to you, but basically what he said was a study by T. Baker Smith was critiqued by some agency, possibly the DOTD. To your knowledge, has that T. Baker Smith plan ever been critiqued by any state agency or anybody involved in this in any case?
T. Baker Smith is a very old engineering firm. They have an outstanding history. They're in Houma, Louisiana. They've done work all over the country. Their reputation stands for itself. They know about designing highways. It's not a complicated thing to design a highway at grade. It went through an old federal rail right-of-way between Breaux Bridge and St. Martinsville. Of the 1,200 acres it required, about 400 acres we already own as a right-of-way the federal government owns in an abandoned rail track. And a lot of these rail tracks were easements on people's property. This, in some cases, they were acquired by the federal government. This one was acquired and still in possession of the federal government. It's 150-foot right-of-way. So the critique, you know, what you could settle, what you'd say about it, you know, the cost estimates, the standard estimates, takes 1,200 acres of property. It's standard design on the interchanges. I think there's 4 interchanges. The road and interchanges can all be built simultaneously. It's all on level ground. You have to cross the Vermilion. You do not cross the Teche, and you gotta cross by Tartu. When you cross those places, you invariably run into the space between the low and high water mark. Is always a wetland, so those issues have to be permitted by the Corps. But they're not. Vermilion is not a very big waterway, neither is by Tartu. So it's not a big deal to deal with those things. So this is undoable, should have been done. And it's, when you look at Terrebonne Parish alone, you have 50,000 people live south of the Intercoastal Canal in Terrebonne Parish. For those people, it's a mandatory evacuation. The people from the Forest Parish, the people from South Jefferson, you know, towards Grand Isle, they're not gonna go to New Orleans anymore. They head in our direction to go up to Shreveport, Alexandria, or to get out of harm's way as far as they can from the hurricane. So Highway 90 is critical, and you know, to build this, you would still have Highway 90, and so you have 2 roads for the price of 1 interchange for this project.
Please come up, Rose, if you don't mind.
Carol, I don't know much about government, but I'm wondering, what is the governor's take on building the ridge, and can we bypass the Lafayette Consolidated Government, Acadiana 1, to get the ridge?
I think you would have like Representative Terry Landry is certainly in favor of it. The opposition the government has received on a lot of his efforts and programs are based here in Lafayette and New Iberia. And the comment has been made by him, not a dime would come through this project here in Lafayette while he's in office. So the easy funding is gone. What I'm curious about, this $59 million contract that stopped, what happened to that money? Is that contractor going to be paid $59 million? When you add up all the money that was spent, you're talking about over $100 million in acquired real estate in contract fees and so forth to plan for this thing, and we don't have 1 yard of concrete yet. And probably won't. This project is something that is ill-conceived. Right now, the airport has commissioned an engineering firm out of Pennsylvania to do an environmental impact study on extending the runway back into St. Martin Parish, into the Cypress Island Swamp. Well, we know that the Cypress Island Swamp is pretty important. That's where all our floodwaters go. And to diminish the ability of Biotar 2 to carry that water into that swamp is a real negative for flooding in Lafayette, as well as other areas of St. Martin Parish. So an environmental impact study that is just deal with one portion of a project is unlawful. It's called piecemealing. It's another reason they can be very vulnerable. And the idea that we're going to get some money from heaven to do an environmental impact study, where's it going to come from? Is the city of Lafayette going to put up the money? No way. Is the railroad going to put up the money? No way. Is DOT going to put up the money? No. They're going to just wiggle their way around it. They have a way of dialing pilings, to toluene or benzene to that oil, then they won't go to the aquifer. Well, the piling sits on the aquifer. In all this trial proceeding, it was a question asked, was the Chico aquifer polluted? And there's no evidence, there was no testing. And because they only went to 43, the aquifer was at 50. And as they go down, the pollutants go way up. So the well that was at 43 feet was the one right next to the Salvation Army. They went through 4 feet of solid oil in that depth. 4 feet of solid oil. And it's not going to go away. I mean, this stuff is volatile organic compound. They readily evaporate. They're evaporating all the time. So you got a real air quality problem. You have a surface runoff. To deal with the surface runoff, they went and put 12 by 12s all over the place to pond it. And the reason they want to pond it is they want the pollutants to be taken out by the sunlight, just like the chlorine in your swimming pool. That's the theory. And those ponding barriers were mentioned in the case. They're just trying to deal with surface pollutants that they know is there. That's landing right in the bayou. And as Marshall said, one of the biggest environmental negatives in our dredging programs, and we did the intercoastal, you name it, is there should be a hydrologic investigation that determine in a bayou like the Vermilion, or you could call it the Calcasieu, what are the barriers that separate the surface from the groundwater? That should be investigated. Because if you go and dredge through a clay barrier, then you're taking the surface water and bringing it right into the groundwater. Now, Boy Scouts own a camp right on the Vermilion, north of Ivanhoe, about 2 miles. 16 acres. We've drilled 12 wells there. And the last one, as far as we could get from the bayou, and down to 650 feet. And when they would test, the fecal contamination in the well is exactly the same as the bayou. So if pollutants are coming from the rail yard, going down the bayou, it's landing in somebody's wells. I can assure you, I can guarantee it.
Thank you.
You have another question?
I want to make sure I say this is just a point of clarification. I want to make sure you don't leave here with bad information. Before Harold came, I said something that might be off the wall, maybe not. I said that the cost to clean up for all these toxic waste could exceed the cost of the project itself. Is that accurate?
One of the estimates, if you just do the math, you take 40 acres and you go down, I figured it at 30 feet. And to get rid of this material is around $1,200 a ton when you get it to Bateman Island at Morgan City. It's one of the few places in the country that accepts contaminated soils. So you do the math, you're around $2.5 billion to do this. You go, to start dealing with surface acre feet, and a cubic yard of material. Cubic yard is a little over 3,000 pounds. So you got 1.5 tons per cubic yard. So you just start doing the math, and you got to haul it there. Then you got to bring something back that's good. You got to get some good stuff to put. Then you got to put a barrier. Then you got to put continuous monitoring, just like that well site. I mean, that little filling station over there in downtown New Iberia, which was 0.2 of an acre. So, I mean, the railroad knows what has to be done, and shame on our leaders in this community for allowing that stuff to sit there since 1960 when it was closed. And we've had a lot of time to deal with it. This highway is a blessing in a way because it's going to force government to deal with it. Win or lose. The highway will never be there. It'll require moving it, that'll require new EIS, and it may have some sense about how much money we spend. To the engineers, they're the biggest optimists in the world. If I put the money together and tell the engineers we want to build a lake on the moon, they'll do it.
Jim Reed, you need a specific question?
I want to thank Harold for coming tonight. He's been here several times. I don't know anybody as knowledgeable as Harold in this subject yet. It's kind of him to come talk with us again, and we sure appreciate all you do, Harold. Thank you. The two things I would like to talk to Harold about. I recall about 20 years ago when this I-49 hit the news, the public. The group that controlled the Northgate Mall, the Northgate Mall at that time was much larger and more successful than they are now, I believe. But those people, at least the rumor, and I'm going to ask Harold about this, the rumor at the time was that the big money interests said, if we build a roadway that doesn't go in front of our store, we may lose some business. And therein was the original plan to put this elevated roadway in front of Northgate Mall. Is that true?
Yeah, that's pretty much true, and that's one of the issues. They were always planning to put an overpass on the road, and that was kind of stopped. Douglas Straff shared something with me in the early 80s, 82, 83. I think he had just been elected, and it might have been 2 or 3 years later. The economy was in the tank, and this area had a lot of unemployment. You see bumper stickers that said, the last one to leave, turn out the lights, all over Lafayette. So, but there was an economic job-creating project that was proposed, and it involved the U.S. highway system, and it involved 12 overpasses, all on either Highway 90, 167 across town, all on those federal highways. And we were only putting up about 25% of it. And at the time, an overpass cost around 10 to 15 million. So we were putting up maybe 20 million to get 12 overpasses, and the Chamber of Commerce stopped it. That would be detrimental to Northgate Mall and some of the other malls, and detrimental to business. And so we're the only community of any size in the state of Louisiana that doesn't have one overpass. We don't have one modern traffic exchange in the city of Lafayette. You wonder why we don't have service roads on I-10s? Because that would develop the north side of town when the south side of town needs to be developed. So, the real estate developers and the Chamber of Commerce have played a major role in holding this community back. And they continue to do that with this crazy project. They want to do that. All kinds of funding ideas. They want to tow I-10 from Mississippi to Texas. I-10 was built in the 60s. They want us to pay for it again? We already got a lot of money coming in. Every time you buy a gallon of gasoline, you got 18 cents state tax. You got 18 cents federal tax. That's the U.S. highway system. And you got 10 cents interstate highway. So we already well taxed for our roads. What's horrendous is that the U.S. Highway Fund is all administered by the state of Louisiana. Only 11% of it goes to the roads. That's the gasoline tax. Our own 18 cents gasoline tax, only like 14% goes to the roads. And they want to raise the gasoline tax for what? Just give us we paying gasoline tax, these are road use taxes, put it on the roads. Let's have some decent roads.
Well, that's a pleasure, you know, with my memory these days, to have Harold say that that was a correct memory from 20 years ago. Pretty good. The other thing I want to mention, urban planners around the country have coined a term called freeway teardown movement. Freeway teardown movement. And they did that because there's over a dozen cities that have even tore down their freeways, the elevated expressways, or they're in the process of planning to do that. Cities like New York and Boston, Syracuse, Buffalo, Miami, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Austin, Milwaukee. Memory's getting dull now. Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, Seoul, Korea. Thank you. And probably some more, but that's not bad to remember those. So the reason that they give for doing this is quite varied. It has to do with the fact that when you put up this elevated expressway, it divides a city in at least two parts and destroys the mesh that defines a city, destroys the traffic patterns that go across an elevated expressway. So what they have decided to do is when they tear those down and put in a boulevard at ground level, which is much more attractive. Attractive is one of the problems. Like the crime, the pollution, the noise, the fact that property values are reduced. There are many different reasons why these cities are doing that. But I think it might be well for Lafayette to take a lesson and try to read up on what these other cities are doing and not go down the road where we will be sorry one day for having an elevated expressway. Harold?
Yeah, I think you're completely right, you know, that we were up in Fargo, North Dakota 3 weeks ago, and we were having breakfast, and there was a girl using the telephone, and she mentioned her phone number as a 337 number. So when she got off the phone, I said, "You from Lafayette?" She said, "Yeah, I spent 2 years in Lafayette." She was a salesperson for the tobacco companies, and she lived in Omaha. And I said, "What are your memories of Lafayette?" "Oh, it's the worst traffic jam town I ever lived in." And I thought, wow. The first thing she said, you know how many overpasses, it one big traffic jam after another. And, you know, just a comment, and that's not, you know, quickly say, you know, we really should be, when you look at our traffic, to try to marry the cross-country traffic with local traffic is a big problem. You see that problem in Baton Rouge. Nobody wants to go through Baton Rouge anymore because it can be stuck there for 2 or 3 hours because somebody had a flat tire. And so we should be looking at like the Evangeline Thruway. It's a block apart. That'd make a wonderful boulevard, a wonderful public space. We already own, they've already bought most of it. So, you know, to make that, it needs a couple of overpasses to allow traffic to flow, but design the thing for 35-mile-an-hour local traffic. And let the trucks and all that, cane trucks, go around town on a bypass. You know, hazardous material. These tunnel things, you cannot put hazardous material. No gasoline, butane, a long list of trucks that can't go through it. Where are they gonna go? You have to provide an alternate route. I can guarantee it's not gonna go down in Bassett. It's gonna go right through VZ Addition. Book it.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to inform you that mid-December, the community working groups, all of the I-49 process that they've been going through. We'll have a public meeting, so look for it in your newspapers and be there. You can make a difference. You can. This is the only time that the public really gets to talk and makes any suggestions at all. So be sure to keep an eye open for that. We'll let Carol know and he can announce it, but be there. You are able to make a difference.
Public input is very important. You know, the most important person in our society is not the mayor, it's not the governor, it's the citizen. The citizen who's willing to take up public issues, that doesn't have a dog in the hunt, is not gonna make profits, he's there in the public interest. That's an important person. And you know, I come from that vantage point as being a lifelong resident of Lafayette, born and raised in Lafayette. I rode my bikes to school, hitting bumps through VZ Edition, and those bumps are still there today. So, but this community is a wonderful community, has a wonderful citizenry. The university has made up enormous, you know, the enormous asset to this community, because people came from, you know, from Baudelainville and you name it, and they made their homes here. The people who came with the oil industry made enormous contributions to that community, to our community. They came, and with their resources, they're willing to contribute to make this a great community. And so we have a lot to be thankful for. We sure don't need to stick this piece of junk highway right over our town and destroy our history. One of the things when we took this last trip up to Minnesota a few weeks ago, we stayed in 3 communities that were really interesting. They all have something in common. Cape Girardeau in Missouri, right on the Mississippi River. Beautiful, very successful town who preserved its old homes and buildings. And a lot of the old homes are cafes, they are art shops, you name it, lawyers' offices, but these old structures have been maintained. They have free parking. They have ample parking space that's well decorated and very much in evidence all over is public art, paintings and sculptures and beautiful landscape. And their connection to the environmental asset that this Cape Girardeau was a river. And that's all shown through the community. The same with Jackson Hole, Wyoming. You know, it's a boom town. And public art everywhere, free parking everywhere, a pride in the old historical structures and buildings. You walk into buildings, a little plaque built in 1895, whatever. And the same for Crested Butte, Colorado. They all have something in common. A connection to the environment around, a craving for preservation of the history, public art, public pride in common grounds and parks and plantings and everything, a pride in those communities. And we can learn a lot from it. Lafayette has all the resources to make, you know, this a super attractive community. We're right next to the basin. We're the gateway to the basin. You want to go to the basin, you want to land by air, you land here. We're right next to the marshland, which is a 6 million acre wetland. And we fail to bring that connectivity to that natural environment, which enriches the community. And of course, is something that our youngsters can learn from, that environment that surrounds us, that's so rich and so much a part of our heritage.
I want to take it this time to certainly thank Harold for coming up here. We appreciate everything you had to tell us, and certainly
I'm honored to be
we
here.
educated, absolutely. And we want to thank Vic Hummert and also Mr. Harold Broussard for being with us here this evening. Marshall, I'm serious. I'm very sorry, excuse me, Mr. Marshall.
to be associated
Yeah,
with
well,
Harold.
thank y'all.
I'm honored.
And a round of applause for all of you. Just an announcement before we terminate our meeting here. Everybody's been very attentive. We've had some great information that we need to take and and certainly follow up and do some good things with it. On the 21st, as it stands right now, there will definitely be a runoff in District 3, House of Representatives. I think I'll be able to have the top 2 people here on the 21st, and anyhow, we will have a meeting 2 weeks from tonight. It will be emailing, please put your name, emails, and so forth, and we'll get that to you, because we have different speakers. Our number one need for Lafayette and this state, as far as our organization started over 30 years ago, and education was the most important thing. Economic development was in there. Also the government that deals with all of our services or not services. Sometimes we get the wrong service. So we're on those subjects, and there's one other item that we work with, and we try to get speakers to come to the table. So our environmental issue, we certainly did a good job tonight with all the speakers, and we thank you all very much, and we appreciate everyone being here.